Hansel and Gretel Family Counseling Services, because sometimes mom really is the problem. Is your family suffering from unexplained forest excursions, mysterious breadcrumb shortages, an elderly relative building suspiciously edible real estate? Has your mother recently suggested that reducing household expenses might involve permanently misplacing two of the children? Then you may qualify for assistance from Hansel and Gretel Family Counseling Services, because apparently somebody had to step in. At Hansel and Gretel Family Counseling Services, our highly trained medieval therapists specialize in helping families affected by famine, witches, questionable parenting, and emotionally devastating fairy tales. Our services include emergency breadcrumb replacement programs, gingerbread-house safety inspections, witch identification workshops, ovens understanding appropriate and inappropriate uses, stepmother rehabilitation seminars, maybe let's not leave the kids in the woods parenting classes. Testimonial. I was going to abandon my children in a forest because crop yields were down. But after one consultation, I learned there are healthier coping mechanisms, like discussing my feelings or selling the goat. Anonymous Mother, Germany, 1316. Our specialist can also determine whether the elderly woman living in the woods is a harmless baker, a misunderstood widow, a tax collector, or an actual child-eating cannibal. And for a limited time, sign up today and receive our complimentary guide, 50 Ways to Know Your Neighbor is a Witch, including helpful warning signs such as lives alone in a candy mansion, constantly asks if your children have gained weight, owns industrial-sized baking equipment, says things like, come closer, dearie, way too often. Hansel and Gretel Family Counseling Services does not guarantee survival during famines, plagues, peasant revolts, Viking raids, insurrections, dragon attacks, crop failures, or encounters with elderly women possessing unusually large ovens. Counseling unavailable in most regions between 1315 and 1317 due to widespread starvation and civilization collapsing. Hansel and Gretel Family Counseling Services. Because if your solution to financial hardship is abandoning the kids, maybe you're the witch. Remember, history is horrifying. Fairy tales are suspicious. And gingerbread houses should require building permits. Disclaimer. The following documentary is intended for educational, historical, folkloric, psychological, and spiritually exhausting purposes only. This program discusses famine, cannibalism, medieval parental decision-making, abandoned children, witches, gingerbread architecture, and enough unresolved childhood trauma to make therapy bills look like a charitable donation. Pizza vs. Studios does not endorse starvation, child abandonment, witchcraft, oven-related homicides, eating your neighbors, eating your relatives, or turning elderly women into charcoal because they happen to live in a house made of baked goods. All historical interpretations presented herein are based upon publicly available scholarship, folklore studies, medieval chronicles, and the collective realization that Europeans apparently process catastrophic suffering by turning it into bedtime stories for 6-year-olds. If this documentary ruins gingerbread houses, Christmas operas, or your ability to hear Once Upon a Time without thinking about societal collapse, take that up with history. And whichever medieval peasant thought, you know what these children need after surviving famine? A singing duck.
Hansel and Gretel, the fairy tale that remembered famine. a Pizzaverse Studios documentary, a Palermo Productions original. Written by Bambi Palermo. Narrated by Vincent DiPrio. Fairy tales are supposed to comfort children. Instead, Europe spent 700 years whispering stories about cannibalism, abandonment, starvation, witches, and mothers contemplating the unthinkable. Today, we're going to find out why. And by the end of this documentary, you may never look at a gingerbread house the same way again. The Apocalypse of 1315. Did you know that the villain in the original version of Hansel and Gretel wasn't a stepmother but their biological mother? Today, we're uncovering the catastrophic historical event that some scholars believe this bedtime story was designed to preserve. A 3-year apocalypse that transformed ordinary parents into the very monsters we still fear in fairy tales. And here's what will haunt you. The most disturbing detail isn't the witch. It isn't the gingerbread house. It's the question every child instinctively asks when they hear this story. A question that reveals they may already understand the truth adults have spent centuries trying to soften. Let's begin. Between 1315 and 1317, something catastrophic struck medieval Europe. The Great Famine wasn't simply a period of hunger. For millions, it was an apocalypse. Climate instability brought relentless rain. Fields became swamps. Seeds rotted before they could sprout. High spoiled. Livestock weakened. And within months, the social fabric of medieval society began to unravel. Chroniclers wrote about theft becoming common, parents begging in villages they had once prospered in, people wandering roads in search of food that no longer existed. In England, even the royal household struggled. In August 1315, King Edward II stopped at St. Albans and reportedly had difficulty finding enough bread to feed his entourage. When the King of England has trouble finding bread, you know something has gone terribly wrong. Some medieval accounts describe scenes so disturbing that historians still debate exactly how much was literal observation and how much reflected fears amplified by catastrophe. Chronicles mention starvation, desperation, abandoned children, rumors of cannibalism, bodies stolen from graves, people making choices they would never have considered in ordinary times. Whether every story was true almost misses the point. People believed such things were possible, and once a society begins believing parents might sacrifice children to survive, something fundamental has already broken. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't folklore. This was Europe attempting to survive one of the worst famines in its recorded history. And perhaps this was where Hansel and Gretel truly began. Not as a fairy tale, not as entertainment, but as a memory. A memory too horrifying to preserve directly. A memory that could only survive disguised as a story about breadcrumbs, a witch, and a house made entirely of food. Because when food disappears, even love can become negotiable. And that realization may be the most frightening monster ever placed inside a fairy tale. The mother who became a stepmother. And here's where the fairy tale begins to reveal its true face. When the Brothers Grimm first published Hansel and Gretel in 1812, they weren't composing an entirely new story. They were recording a tale that had circulated through German villages for generations. Collected from storytellers such as Dorchen Wilde and other informants, The narrative carried echoes of fears much older than the 19th century. And yet, the famine wasn't simply remembered in chronicles and church records. It seeped into family memory. Which is why, when the Grimms first recorded Hansel and Gretel, the real horror surfaced not in the witch, but in the mother herself. Now, you need to understand something crucial about the version of Hansel and Gretel most people think they know. You picture an evil stepmother, a cold-hearted outsider, a woman who persuades a reluctant father to abandon his children in the woods. She wasn't there. In the Grimm Brothers' 1812 edition, the character was simply called the mother. The biological mother. The woman who carried these children, fed them, held them, and then calculated that 2 deaths in the forest might be preferable to 4 deaths inside a starving home. No curse, no possession, no witchcraft, only hunger, only desperation. Only a mother making an impossible decision. But by 1857, something had changed. Germany had changed. Society had changed. And the idea that a mother could willingly abandon her own children had become unbearable. So Wilhelm Grimm sat in his study in Kassel, Germany, quill in hand, methodically crossing out the word Mutter, mother, and replacing it with Stiefmutter, stepmother. Again. And again. And again. By the middle of the 19th century, motherhood had become sacred. The ideal German mother represented virtue, piety, self-sacrifice, the moral center of the household. Middle-class audiences could accept witches. They could accept cannibalism. They could even accept children being locked in cages. But a biological mother plotting the deaths of her own children, that was too terrible. Too human. Too plausible. Folklorist Maria Tatar notes that many 19th century children grew up in blended households because death during childbirth remained tragically common. Stepmothers already carried a social stigma. They made convenient villains. A scapegoat. Someone who could absorb centuries of fear and guilt. Scholar Jack Zipes argues that the Grimms reshaped many of their stories to reflect their own ideals about family life. The father, originally more complicit in the abandonment, gradually became softer, more sympathetic, more reluctant. New dialogue appeared. I do feel sorry for the poor children. Words absent from earlier versions. The Grimms weren't simply editing a fairy tale. They were editing memory itself, trying to make the past more bearable, trying to convince themselves that mothers do not become monsters. But stories remember things people wish they could forget. Notice what happens at the end of Hansel and Gretel. The children escape. They kill the witch. They return home and discover that their stepmother has mysteriously died. No explanation. No illness. No funeral. She is simply gone. Almost as though the tale itself refuses to accept the substitution. Almost as though the witch and the mother were never separate characters at all, but 2 faces of the same terrible possibility. The nurturing woman and the starving woman. The provider and the predator. The mother who loves her children, and the mother who fears watching them starve. The Grimms may have crossed out the word, but they never truly erased it. The story remembered, even when society chose not to. The Witch's Kitchen. If the mother's betrayal was the wound at the center of Hansel and Gretel, then the Witch's Kitchen was the scar. For most of us, the gingerbread house feels whimsical, a cottage made of candy. Sugared windows, cake walls, frosting dripping from the roof. A child's fantasy, a reward waiting at the end of a frightening journey. But to people who lived through famine, a house made entirely of food would not have seemed magical. It would have seemed obscene. A monument to abundance in a world where abundance no longer existed. Imagine being a starving child in 14th century Europe. You've spent months eating grass, roots, spoiled grain, whatever scraps could be scavenged from the roadside. Then suddenly, you see a building constructed entirely from bread, honey, sugar, meat, everything your body craves. It is not a miracle. It is temptation. And temptation in famine stories is rarely free. The witch understands this. She doesn't seize Hansel and Gretel immediately. She welcomes them, feeds them, offers warmth, offers shelter, offers exactly what their own family could no longer provide. Only later does the truth emerge. Hansel is locked inside a cage. Gretel is forced to cook. And every day, the witch checks Hansel's finger, waiting, measuring, calculating, determining whether he is fat enough to eat. It is one of the most disturbing scenes in European folklore, not because it is supernatural, but because it feels disturbingly practical. Starvation changes people. It changes morality. It changes priorities. It changes what becomes imaginable. Medieval chroniclers recorded stories of graves being opened, bodies stolen, rumors of human flesh being preserved with salt, people discussing survival in ways they never would have considered during ordinary times. Historians debate how widespread these incidents truly were. But once again, the precise numbers almost don't matter. People believed such horrors could happen. That belief alone leaves scars, and scars become stories. The witch checking Hansel's finger each morning may not simply be a storyteller's invention. It may be a symbolic memory, a way for survivors to speak about starvation without speaking about starvation. The gingerbread house becomes something even darker. It represents a complete reversal of everything a home is supposed to be. Food is meant to comfort. Bread is meant to sustain life. A house is meant to shelter children. But here sweetness becomes temptation. The house becomes a trap. And the woman tending the oven offers care only to exploit those who trust her. Everything nurturing has been turned upside down. The house is not simply edible. It is deceptive. And perhaps that is why the image remains so powerful. Because deep down, everyone understands the fear. The people who are meant to protect us. The people who feed us. The people who keep us safe. under extreme hardship, may fail in the responsibilities we expect them to uphold. But Hansel and Gretel are not helpless. They have already learned a lesson many children should never have to learn. Adults are not always able to provide safety, and survival belongs to those willing to adapt. Because the real transformation in this story is not the witch, it is the children. And what hardship teaches them to become? Children who learned not to trust adults. Hansel and Gretel are not portrayed as helpless innocents, and that detail reveals something crucial about the world that created this story. From the moment Hansel overhears his parents plotting their abandonment, he begins preparing. First, he gathers white pebbles. Later, he scatters breadcrumbs. These aren't lucky improvisations. They're survival strategies. The actions of a child who has already learned that adults cannot always be trusted, that promises can be broken, that love does not always guarantee safety, and that sometimes you have to save yourself. Gretel's transformation is even more telling. At the beginning of the story, she appears younger, more frightened, more dependent on her brother. She cries. She follows. She waits for someone else to find a solution. But by the end, she's the one standing beside the oven, the one who recognizes an opportunity, the one who deceives the witch, and the one who pushes another human being to her death. It is justified. It is necessary. It is self-defense. But it is still killing. And the story never pretends otherwise. Because famine changes children. It forces them to grow up too quickly. It strips away innocence. It teaches lessons that no child should ever have to learn. Be suspicious. Stay alert. Hide food. Watch people carefully. Trust your siblings. Trust yourself. And when survival is on the line, do what must be done. The popularity of Hansel and Gretel tells us something unsettling. Children across Europe didn't reject this story. They embraced it. Generation after generation. Not because they enjoyed being frightened, but because they recognized something inside it. These were not children raised in modern comfort. Many had watched siblings die from disease. Many had seen parents struggle through shortages. Many understood that adults were not all powerful, that mothers could become desperate, that fathers could become weak, that entire communities could collapse. Hansel and Gretel survive because they adapt, because they become resourceful, because they stop expecting rescue. And perhaps that is the hidden purpose of the fairy tale. Not to entertain children, but to train them, to prepare them, to whisper hard truths long before life has the chance to shout them. The breadcrumbs fail. Birds eat them. The forest remains. The children are trapped. The lesson is brutal. Some plans don't work. Some precautions fail. Sometimes the world itself conspires against survival. And yet, Hansel and Gretel keep moving. They improvise. They endure. They fight back. And eventually, they win. But they were never alone. Across Europe, other stories remembered the same nightmare. Different languages. Different monsters. different endings. Yet all of them carried the same warning. Hunger changes people. And sometimes, the people it changes the most are the ones children depend upon. Europe's shared nightmare. Hansel and Gretel were never alone. Across Europe, the same nightmare kept resurfacing. Different countries remembered it in different ways. Different storytellers added new details. Different cultures changed the ending. But beneath the surface, the fear remained the same. Children abandoned. Food withheld. Predators waiting. And hunger lurking behind every tree. In Russia, stories of Baba Yaga tell of orphaned siblings wandering into the domain of a terrifying old woman. Her house stands upon chicken legs. At first glance, it sounds absurd. A whimsical invention. A bizarre piece of Slavic imagination. But folklorists have suggested another possibility. Throughout Eastern Europe, granaries were often built upon stilts, raised above the ground to keep grain safe from rodents and moisture. From a distance, these structures could resemble enormous bird legs. Imagine being a starving child during a famine, looking toward a raised storehouse overflowing with grain. Food exists. Food is visible. Food could save your family. Yet it remains beyond your reach. Protected. Guarded. Reserved for someone else. The house that walks may not have been magic at all. It may have been memory. A nightmare disguised as architecture. Inside waits Baba Yaga. A woman with iron teeth. A woman who speaks casually about grinding children into flour. She doesn't chase her victims. She waits. Patiently. Knowing hunger eventually drives desperate people toward anyone promising food. England preserved a different version of the same terror. The tale, known as Babes in the Wood, removes almost every element of fantasy. There is no witch. No candy house. No magical rescue. Only two children. Led into a forest. Abandoned. Left to die. In some versions, the hired murderers lose their nerve, unable to kill the children directly, so they simply walk away, allowing nature to finish the job. Eventually, the children perish, and a robin covers their bodies with leaves. No treasure. No revenge. No triumphant return home. Only loss. Only grief. And a reminder that not every child survives. Then there is Portugal. One of the most devastating variants of all. Abandoned children arrive at a crossroads. Before them lie two paths. One golden. One silver. One supposedly leads to safety. The other leads to the witch. But in older tellings, both roads lead to the witch. The choice itself is meaningless. An illusion. A cruel joke played by fate. Sometimes there is no correct decision. No clever solution. No breadcrumb trail. No hidden treasure. Only hunger. Only danger. Only children trying to survive in a world that has already failed them. Each culture remembered something different. Russia remembered inaccessible food. England remembered abandonment. Portugal remembered hopelessness. Germany remembered mothers. But all of them remembered famine. All of them remembered desperation. And all of them preserved a warning. Civilization is fragile. Communities break. Families fracture. People change. And when enough people are starving, even fairy tales begin to sound less like fantasies and more like eyewitness testimony. Humperdinck's Christmas cover-up. By the end of the 19th century, Europe had changed. Factories had replaced fields. Cities had grown. Food shortages still occurred, but for many middle-class families, famine had become something distant, something historical, something their grandparents spoke about. And perhaps because the old memories had become uncomfortable, people decided to soften them, to make them prettier, kinder, safer. Then, in 1893, composer Engelbert Humperdinck transformed Hansel and Gretel into an opera. Picture the scene. December 23, 1893. The Court Theater in Weimar, Germany. Christmas trees decorated with candles. Families arriving in their finest clothing. Children excited for an evening of music and holiday entertainment. No one came expecting to confront medieval starvation. No one came expecting to revisit the darkest corners of human behavior. They came for magic. And magic is exactly what they received. In Humperdinck's version, the mother is no longer plotting abandonment. She is simply frustrated. She spills a jug of milk, scolds the children, and sends them into the forest to gather strawberries. No famine. No impossible choices. No discussion of death. No suggestion that parents might sacrifice children to save themselves. Instead, the forest becomes enchanting. A sandman arrives, sprinkling sleep dust. A dew fairy awakens the children with gentle songs. 14 guardian angels descend from heaven, protecting Hansel and Gretel as they sleep. The children sing the Abendsagen, the evening prayer, one of the most beautiful melodies ever written for the stage. When at night I go to sleep, 14 angels watch do keep. Parents smiled. Children listened. The audience relaxed. At last, the nightmare had been transformed into a Christmas tradition, because even Humperdinck could not completely erase what lay beneath the story. By the third act, the witch returns. She still owns the house. She still imprisons Hansel. She still plans to cook children. She still checks whether Hansel has gained enough weight. And suddenly, beneath the glitter, beneath the angels, beneath the music, the old horror claws its way back onto the stage. The oven still burns. The cage still waits. The cannibal still smiles, even dressed in Christmas decorations and accompanied by a full orchestra. The witch survived. Perhaps because some stories refuse to stay buried. Perhaps because collective memories don't disappear. They simply change costumes. Richard Strauss conducted the premiere and praised the opera as a masterpiece. And maybe it was. But what kind of masterpiece requires 14 angels? To distract us from one woman preparing to roast children alive? Humperdinck tried to turn Hansel and Gretel into a lullaby. But lullabies do not erase trauma. They merely teach us how to sleep beside it. And eventually, new storytellers would begin peeling away the sugar coating, removing the angels, removing the sentimentality, and digging back down toward the bones of the original tale. The monsters return. Something changed in the 21st century. Filmmakers, novelists, folklorists, even psychologists began stripping away 2 centuries of sanitization. They stopped pretending Hansel and Gretel was merely a charming bedtime story and started treating it as what it may always have been, a story about hunger, fear, abandonment, and what human beings become when survival eclipses morality. One of the most striking modern reinterpretations arrived in 2020, Gretel and Hansel. Directed by Oz Perkins, the film abandons bright colors and candy-coated whimsy. Its world is cold, bleak, almost diseased. The forest feels alive, watching, waiting. The house no longer sparkles. It decays. Food spoils. Sugar becomes rot. Warmth becomes suffocation. And the witch, portrayed by Alice Kriege, is unsettling in a way few earlier versions dared to attempt. She is not cackling, not theatrical, not exaggerated. She is calm, maternal, almost comforting. Until she isn't. She smiles. She cooks. She speaks softly. And beneath every gesture lies something predatory, something ancient, something that feels less like an individual villain, and more like famine itself wearing a human face. The film quietly returns to one of the oldest ideas hidden inside the story, that the witch may not be separate from the mother at all, but rather an extension of her, a reflection, a possibility, a warning about what desperation can become. Other modern storytellers have traveled similar paths. Writers have increasingly interpreted Hansel and Gretel through the lens of displacement, migration, war, and refugee experiences. Children wandering through hostile landscapes, separated from home, dependent upon strangers, searching desperately for food, shelter, and safety. Suddenly, the fairy tale no longer feels medieval. It feels contemporary. Images of starving families crossing borders, children sleeping in camps, people waiting behind fences for supplies, communities arguing about who deserves help. The details change. The centuries pass, but the underlying fear remains. Adults fail. Institutions collapse. Predators exploit vulnerability, and children pay the price. Perhaps that is why Hansel and Gretel refuses to disappear, because every generation eventually encounters its own forest, its own witch, its own gingerbread house. Something promising salvation, something hiding danger. Something beautiful enough to distract desperate people from asking the questions they should be asking. Who built this place? Why is there so much food? And what exactly does the owner expect in return? For centuries, audiences tried to soften these questions. They added angels, songs, fairies, Christmas decorations, happy endings. But the old story remained, waiting patiently, like the witch herself, knowing that eventually someone would become hungry enough, desperate enough, or frightened enough to understand it all over again. Why children already know the question. Every child who hears Hansel and Gretel eventually asks a question, not always aloud, not always immediately, but sooner or later it emerges. Why didn't the parents simply eat the children themselves? It's a question that seems shocking, a question adults often dismiss, a question many parents hope their children never think to ask. And yet, children ask it. Because children understand something adults spend their lives trying to deny. If hunger becomes severe enough, if desperation becomes overwhelming enough, people change. During the Great Famine, medieval chroniclers recorded stories so disturbing that historians still debate how literally they should be taken. There are references to cannibalism, rumors of parents consuming children, church edicts condemning unnatural acts committed against one's own blood, laws appearing suddenly to prohibit crimes that lawmakers apparently feared people might commit, mass graves containing the remains of adults and children buried together, small bones broken, fragments scattered, evidence difficult to interpret and impossible to forget. Whether every account was factual matters less than what these stories reveal about human psychology. People believe such things could happen. People feared they could happen. And fear has a way of surviving long after events themselves have faded. Perhaps that is what the witch truly represents. Not an external monster waiting in the woods, but an externalized horror. A way to take an unbearable possibility and place it safely outside the family. She becomes the monster, so mother doesn't have to. She owns the oven, so mother doesn't have to. She fattens Hansel in a cage, so mother doesn't have to. The witch allows children to imagine evil as something separate, something foreign, something that can be defeated. But older versions of the story seem unwilling to maintain that illusion. The mother disappears at precisely the moment the witch dies, almost as though the narrative itself remembers what later generations tried desperately to forget, that they were always connected, perhaps even the same person. The journey into the forest was never really about leaving safety behind. There was no safety. The forest simply offered a different kind of danger. At home waited starvation. In the woods waited predators. The children moved from one threat to another, and yet they survived. Not because adults rescued them, not because society protected them, not because justice prevailed. They survived because they adapted, because Hansel planned, because Gretel acted, because they trusted each other when they could trust no one else. That may be the true purpose of the story, not entertainment, not moral instruction, but preparation, a cultural vaccine, a measured dose of terror, teaching children that sometimes plans fail, breadcrumbs disappear, parents make terrible choices, communities collapse, and the world can become frighteningly indifferent. But even then, you think, you improvise, you endure, and if necessary, you push the witch into her own oven. That is why Hansel and Gretel survives, not because humanity forgot famine, but because some part of us remembers, some part of us understands that civilization is fragile. that abundance can vanish, that fear can distort love, and that beneath every gingerbread roof, there may still linger the memory of an empty table, a cold rain, a starving family, and a mother praying she will never be forced to choose between impossible horrors. The witch burns, the children escape, treasure is found, home is restored. History was rarely so merciful. But fairy tales allow us to win battles that reality often lost. Perhaps that is why we still tell this story, not because we have forgotten, but because some ancient part of ourselves remembers exactly why it was created, and why, after 700 years, it still refuses to let us sleep entirely peacefully. Hansel and Gretel survived. Most children caught in real famines never did. Stories cannot change the past, but they can preserve its warnings. Passed from generation to generation, from parent to child, from grandmother to grandchild. These tales carried memories that history books alone could never keep alive. Perhaps that is why fairy tales endure, not because they comfort us, but because they prepare us. Because hidden beneath the witches, the forests, the breadcrumbs, and the candy are memories of ordinary people confronting extraordinary suffering. And perhaps the most terrifying lesson of all is realizing that monsters are not always born. Sometimes they are simply hungry. If you enjoyed this journey through famine, folklore, witches, medieval trauma, and the realization that Europeans apparently coped with catastrophe by terrifying children for 7 centuries, please like, subscribe, and join us here in the Pizzaverse, where we don't rewrite history. We excavate it, one emotionally devastating bedtime story at a time. Special thanks to everyone supporting Pizzaverse Studios, to the historians, to the folklorists, to the medieval monks who somehow witnessed all this and still thought, you know what future generations need? More bedtime stories. And to you, for voluntarily clicking on a documentary about a gingerbread house, only to discover it was secretly about famine, societal collapse, parental desperation, and humanity being approximately 3 missed meals away from becoming a horror movie. And maybe, don't accept pastries from elderly women living alone in the woods. We'll see you at the next one.
I'm called Gretel, and this rough one here is my brother Hansel.
Tell me the fairy tale again.
It's too scary, and you'll start seeing things that aren't there.
You've been turned out of your home, set out to fend for yourselves with only your clothes and your hides.
I'm hungry.
I'm hungrier than you are.
Because you're a pig.
Look! It smells of cake! Brother!
Careful with that, dear. I'd hate for you to start something you can't stop.
Pleased to make your acquaintance. I'm called Gretel, and this rough one here is my brother Hansel.
Ouch!
There's something wrong here.
But it's so pleasant.
Where are all the animals? From where does she draw milk?
Gretel, there's a storm coming. This is your power. to see what is hidden and to take it. We were given the same gift, the same magic.
What did you do with him?
All that is left is to make him. Delicious.
How'd that cross necklace get over your horns? You know the saying, I bet you be sweating like a whore in church, spending too much time, try to hide behind the Bible. Get in front of it, find out that Jesus was a foreigner. Virgin Mary, you would've deported her. Not before your husband found out she was a minor, he'd have ordered her. Him and his buddies would've recorded her, transported her, extorted her, and then sent her to the coroner. You won't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. I'm pretty sure that God's annoyed of racists bringing him up. Sick of you chumps showing up to take a sip of the cup. You called the Aztec savages, but the cup, isn't it blood? Isn't the stuff symbolic? Oh, it's different, huh? Introduction to blood sacrifice. He died so you can't commit your crimes. Here's the hoping he come back to life. I can't wait to see the face on every single preacher's wife. All them secrets you been keeping, tell me how you sleep at night. All them evil things you feeling, don't need cause you be polite. The deceiving and the thieving ain't concealed as recondite. Only a few people know. And you know why they keep it tight. You won't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. Weaponized all of it, don't know what a proverb is. Cherry picking Bible scripts, oh my God. Arrogance, lying in the Lord names ain't honoring. Pride leading the blind again, oh my God. You must be drunk off the blood of Christ. Or maybe you just back hitting the hooch again. We're back to cosplaying a hooligan. The grip, the cross, to get the dollars like what? Now you forgot where you in your Gucci bin? You won't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians. You don't get to pray for me. You won't bless your heart out of this one. I know that your hate runs deep. God is probably tired of getting name dropped by fake Christians.